There comes a moment in life when the pain you are experiencing is no longer random. It feels patterned, repeated, almost instructional. You try harder, you give more, you explain yourself more clearly, yet the relationship only grows heavier. That is not because you are failing. It is because something deeper is trying to get your attention. When you are entangled with a narcissistic personality, your nervous system often recognizes the danger long before your mind is ready to accept it. Exhaustion becomes constant, confusion replaces clarity. You begin to feel like you are disappearing while trying to keep someone else comfortable. This is not weakness, this is awareness struggling to surface. The universe does not usually remove harmful people abruptly. It prepares you first. It sends signals through emotional fatigue, through the collapse of old justifications, through the moment you realize that love should not require self-erasure. These signs are not punishments, they are protective interruptions. They are designed to help you detach before the damage becomes permanent. If you are listening closely, you will notice that your tolerance for manipulation is shrinking. Your body is resisting what your heart once excused, and your soul is quietly asking for peace over chaos. This is the beginning of liberation. This is how healings start. Long before the narcissist is removed from your life, there are moments in life when chaos no longer feels like a series of random events. It starts to accumulate, layering upon itself, demanding attention in ways that cannot be ignored. In my own journey, I have experienced periods where the same patterns of pain and disappointment repeated endlessly, as if life itself were sending a message I could not yet fully comprehend. At first, I resisted. I tried to rationalize the behavior of those around me, to find excuses, to convince myself that perhaps I was overreacting. But deep down, my body and mind knew the truth. The relentless repetition of hurt was not coincidental. It was a signal, a warning, a quiet insistence that something had to change. The universe often speaks through discomfort, through the moments that push us to the edge of our endurance, and the messages are rarely gentle. I began to notice how the chaos affected every part of my life. My energy was drained, my focus fractured, and the joy I once carried with ease became scarce. Relationships that were meant to uplift me instead pulled me into cycles of blame and confusion. Sleep became fitful, tension lingered in my shoulders, and an unshakable unease settled in my chest. This was not just emotional pain, it was a biological signal that my environment was unsafe. The repeated patterns of hurt were a call to self-preservation, a chance to reclaim my peace before it was irreparably eroded. When chaos becomes a message, it is not meant to punish us, it is meant to guide us toward freedom. Recognizing these signals was not immediate. It required courage to admit that letting go was necessary, courage to face the truth that some people could never provide the respect and care I deserved. The repeated pain was like a teacher, harsh but unyielding, showing me the limits of endurance and the necessity of boundaries. Each episode of emotional turmoil revealed a little more about my values, my limits, and my worth. It was as if the universe had orchestrated a series of lessons designed to break my attachment to what was harmful, so that I could step into a life defined by clarity and self-respect rather than compromise and confusion. The moment I understood that chaos was not my fault but a signal, the power shifted. I began to make conscious choices to protect my emotional well-being, to prioritize relationships that brought mutual respect and nourishment. I started noticing how the patterns of disruption were guiding me toward detachment, toward a life where my energy could be preserved for growth rather than survival. Every repeated disappointment became a marker, a signpost pointing toward liberation. What once felt like endless suffering transformed into a roadmap for change. The pain no longer held me captive. It became the catalyst for awareness, for action, for letting go of what no longer served my highest good. Life has a way of nudging us through discomfort long before we are willing to change. In my own experience, the moments of unease never arrived randomly. They were persistent, sometimes subtle, sometimes unbearable, yet always purposeful. I remember a time when I was clinging to relationships and situations that on the surface seemed manageable, even familiar. But beneath that veneer of normalcy, a constant tension hummed in my chest. I felt restless, drained, and uneasy without understanding why. The universe, in its quiet insistence, was shaking the foundations I had built, forcing me to confront what no longer served my growth or my peace. Discomfort, I realized, is often the first messenger of change. It signals that the patterns we are invested in are misaligned with our well-being. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself the unease was temporary, a phase to endure, a challenge to overcome. I clung to hope that persistence would yield improvement, but the discomfort only intensified. My mind raced, my sleep was fragmented, and my joy felt increasingly fragile. It became clear that the external circumstances were not going to transform themselves without my intervention. The inner restlessness was the universe's way of compelling me to pay attention. It revealed the subtle ways I was compromising myself, excusing harmful behavior, and tolerating disrespect. Every pang of unease was a signal that the energy I was investing was not reciprocated, that my boundaries were being tested beyond their healthy limits, and that the people and situations I relied on were not aligned with my highest good. The process of recognizing this discomfort required honesty and courage. I had to admit that what I once considered essential was actually detrimental. I had to feel the discomfort fully without trying to silence it and understand its purpose. In doing so, I began to see the patterns for what they truly were: repeated lessons from the universe, urging me to release what no longer supported my growth. I realized that the shaking was not meant to punish me, but to awaken me, to shift my attention from what was familiar but harmful toward what was authentic and sustaining. As I responded to the signals, I noticed a subtle transformation. The tension that had been a constant companion began to ease. Boundaries that were once blurred became clear. I could engage with life from a place of presence rather than survival. Relationships that drained me naturally faded, and spaces that honored my peace emerged. The discomfort that once felt unbearable became a guide, showing me where to act, where to release, and where to protect my energy. What had once been a source of anxiety evolved into clarity, a compass directing me toward freedom, healing, and alignment with my true self. There comes a point in life when the people who once dominated your emotional world begin to recede. It does not always happen abruptly. Often, it begins with small moments of silence, unexplained gaps in communication, and an increasing sense of distance that feels both confusing and inevitable. In my own experience, these moments were uncomfortable at first. I questioned myself, wondering if I had done something wrong, if the relationship could be repaired, if I was overreacting. But over time, I began to recognize a pattern. The silence, the space, and the emotional detachment were not punishments, they were signals. They were the universe's way of preparing me for freedom, for a life unburdened by manipulation, control, and emotional depletion. The process is subtle. It begins with noticing how your energy is no longer fully consumed by someone else's demands or moods. You feel less urgency to respond, less need to explain yourself, and strangely, a sense of relief begins to surface amidst the absence. In my life, this was a pivotal awakening. The distance allowed me to see clearly how much of my own identity had been compromised in the name of keeping peace, avoiding conflict, or seeking approval. The detachment, though initially painful, became an opportunity to reconnect with my own needs, my own values, and my own voice. It was as if the universe was giving me a chance to step back, to breathe, and to reclaim the parts of myself I had unconsciously surrendered. The silence is not empty, it is instructive. It teaches patience, reflection, and self-awareness. It allows you to examine the dynamics that once seemed normal but were actually harmful. You begin to recognize patterns of control, manipulation, and exploitation, and the discomfort that once felt like loss transforms into clarity. Distance becomes a protective barrier, shielding your energy from further erosion. Detachment is not indifference, it is the conscious choice to prioritize your well-being, to refuse participation in cycles that no longer serve your growth. In my own journey, embracing these signs allowed me to transition from surviving in a draining environment to thriving in a space of authenticity and self-respect. Through this process, freedom is not just a concept, it becomes tangible. It is felt in the quiet moments when you realize that your life is no longer dictated by someone else's whims. It is felt in the calm that replaces anxiety, in the regained clarity that replaces confusion, and in the strength that emerges when you honor your boundaries. The universe orchestrates these experiences with precision, guiding you to let go at the right pace, preparing you for a reality where peace, respect, and alignment are possible. What once felt like emptiness slowly transforms into opportunity, showing that silence, distance, and detachment are not losses, but the very tools that create space for your liberation. There comes a moment when surviving no longer feels enough. In my own life, there was a period when every day was about endurance, navigating relationships that drained my energy, managing expectations that were impossible to meet, and constantly defending my worth against someone else's relentless demands. Survival became routine, and I mistook it for strength. Yet deep within, a quiet part of me knew that merely surviving was not living. The universe, in its subtle but precise way, began to intervene, creating conditions that nudged me towards something greater, sovereignty over my own life. This process was neither abrupt nor dramatic. It started with small shifts, moments when I could no longer ignore the emotional and mental exhaustion, when the tension in my body became a clear signal that change was necessary. The universe uses these signals to clear space, to remove the people, patterns, and situations that perpetuate harm. In my experience, doors began to close gently, relationships that were once consuming started to fade, and the emotional landscape that had been cluttered with manipulation and control began to empty. This emptiness, initially unsettling, was not a void to fear but a canvas for healing, growth, and self-discovery. The universe creates these gaps intentionally, making room for clarity and self-sovereignty. As the clutter cleared, I began to reclaim parts of myself I had long neglected. My thoughts became my own again, free from constant questioning and self-doubt imposed by others. My choices began to reflect my values rather than someone else's expectations. In the quiet spaces left by absence and detachment, I discovered the power of boundaries, the importance of self-respect, and the profound relief that comes from aligning actions with personal integrity. The universe's intervention, though invisible, felt like a gentle guide, pushing me toward autonomy without force, teaching me that healing is not just recovery from harm, but a deliberate act of creating space for what nurtures and sustains. The journey from survival to sovereignty is not without challenges. It demands courage to let go of familiar patterns, even when they are painful or comforting in their predictability. It requires persistence to honor one's own needs in the face of external pressure and societal expectations. Yet in this process, I learned that true freedom is born when we step fully into our own power. Survival may keep us alive, but sovereignty allows us to thrive, to build a life shaped by conscious choices rather than reactive defense, and to cultivate resilience rooted in self-awareness rather than external validation. Each step toward detachment, each moment of clarity, is a reminder that the universe clears space not to punish, but to prepare us for the life we were always meant to inhabit. The journey through pain, discomfort, and repeated patterns of harm is never easy, yet it is profoundly transformative. As I reflect on my own path, I see that every signal, every moment of unease, and every instance of distance or detachment was a guide, not an obstacle. The universe communicates in ways that often feel subtle, even invisible, but its messages are precise. It clears what no longer serves us to make room for growth, peace, and authentic connection. Learning to recognize these signs is the first step toward reclaiming your life from those who drain your energy or manipulate your emotions. Healing begins when we stop resisting the signals and start listening. It starts with understanding that survival is not enough, and that true sovereignty requires boundaries, self-respect, and the courage to step into your own power. The emptiness left behind by those who no longer belong in our lives is not a loss. It is freedom waiting to be claimed. Each choice to protect yourself, each moment of clarity, brings you closer to a life defined not by others' control, but by your own intention, strength, and grace. The universe has already begun preparing the way. Your role now is to embrace it fully.